Hey everybody, this is 365 Days of Movies. This is where I rate my top 365 movies. One movie a day for a year. So, with that, let's get into this movie. Number 264, First Blood, rating 7.37. Released in 1982, directed by Ted Kotcheff. Starring Sylvester Stallone, Richard Crenna, Brian Dennehy. Vietnam veteran and drifter John J. Rambo wanders into a small American town in search of an old friend, but is met with intolerance, brutality by the local sheriff, Will Teasle. When Teasle and his deputies restrain and shave Rambo, he flashes back to his time as a prisoner of war and unleashes his fury on the officers. He narrowly escapes the manhunt, but it will take his former commander to save the hunters from the hunted. Now, I don't think I'd ever actually watched the original First Blood. No, I definitely hadn't. Until probably the mid-2010s. I had watched other Rambo movies, and I hadn't known that the original First Blood was a very different movie than these later Rambo films. Less of an action movie, more of a philosophical piece, and a movie that was part of the times. And it's interesting, so there's a stark contrast when watching this film, because in this day and age, veterans are treated with, at the very least, respect, and generally, amongst most of the populace, with an almost adoration. However, that doesn't necessarily translate into benefits for veterans with PTSD and other problems. But there are, at least there's lip service paid to the veneration for veterans. Not so in this time period. I knew about, say, the left-leaning hippie youth being very much against the Vietnam War, and that they condemned a lot of veterans of that war. However, it's interesting because that war involved a draft in which people generally didn't have a choice but to go, and there were people who were draft dodgers. So I guess for a lot of the youth of that time, they looked down on anyone who wasn't a draft dodger, because there's a lot of evidence that they threw blood on veterans, and they really vilified veterans during their protests. However, in a lot of those anti-Vietnam protests, I think there were quite a few veterans, from what I remember. Now, I didn't understand until watching this movie the establishment take on veterans as well, and it seems like veterans were also looked down upon by generally conservative factions and older people in power in certain areas, like a sheriff in a small town. So a lot of the time, I remember watching an older movie about World War II veterans and how badly they were treated after the war, and that they were often seen as being, like John J. Rambo, a drifter and problematic and people that cause trouble. So the sheriff in this movie, wants to get this veteran out of his town as soon as possible, and because of that, acts in a way that then, activates John J. Rambo's PTSD. That they didn't refer to it at that time, but that's essentially what's happening there. And because of that, he starts to react based on the training that he received, and you learn throughout the movie that the training that he received was beyond that of most veterans, and now it's a huge problem for the sheriff and his men, and so Rambo's commander is the only one that can de-escalate the situation, and his commander's motivation, while maybe paternalistic, is mostly also selfish in that he wants to still use Rambo to further his own ends in whatever war theater he needs Rambo in. So he's kind of, he's kind of sympathetic to Rambo, but also is using Rambo and has used Rambo in the past. And will, I guess, continue to going into the future. But you definitely should check this out because it's a very deep movie. And there's also great action in it. But the performance of Sylvester Stallone and Brian Dennehy, I love Brian Dennehy, in this movie is great. So you should check it out. Hey everybody. This has been 365 Days of Movies. We're going to keep plowing ahead. So let me know what you think of this movie. And if you want to discuss it further, comment below. If I get a lot of interest, I may very well make a full review of the movie. Maybe even a video essay. So let me know what you think. And let's get to the next one.